this is Scratch, the current creator of the Smite Basics page. Our goal here is to help new or learning player bases coming into Smite to start to understand the things that many players do try or understand at very high level play. Today we're going to be talking about the current Conquest meta as of SWC 2017. Now, first we're going to talk about Conquest and what we've seen in Season 3. Now, the changes in Season 3 we've seen are areas such as here and this entire jungle setup really changing. I don't know if anybody remembers Season 2, but you had the blue side, I believe, which played a much harder time getting to here, and it actually slowed them down considerably. Now, this opening also leads to more ganking, and specifically invades at the very beginning of the match. Now, the problem with that is this has made it so that ganking from here as the solo and jungler is almost always the correct thing to do. But that is another video for another time. Today, just about the basic meta of the game, we're going to be looking at something that I've only recently seen as of watching everything, which is instead of a very normal 3-2, which we see here, where you have the ADC, the support, and the mid laner getting in here, you tend to have the ADC back here at this camp. This is actually not updated. These camps are farther back at this point. And then you have the support and the mid laner up here clearing their red normally. The mid laner will throw something down. But instead of seeing this 3-2, where obviously the jungle and the solo clear as they're supposed to, we've actually started to see something more interesting, which is a 1-2-2. Now, this is more so referring to after the buffs are cleared. When the buffs are cleared, you could almost call this a reversal, because we see a 2-3 going the other way. You see the mid and the ADC coming here, clearing the buffs that they need to, and then the jungle, the solo, and the support all clearing in here. Now, after that, when we start to see the 1-2-2 happen, is actually a fairly interesting time. The 1-2-2 happens when the ADC comes up here and has the lane all to himself. Now, what's interesting about this is the first time in the game we're actually seeing the ADC have more of a solo farm, whereas the solo is now going to have the jungler consistently in his lane for the first few minutes of gameplay. Now, with that, that does mean there's going to be a bigger XP boost to ADCs, which means we are going to be seeing a late game trend that's going to be hitting much sooner. But then the question is, after the support's cleared, where does the support go? And your answer would be the mid lane. Now, this is where we get the idea of the 1-2-2. Because you have the jungler and the solo over here in this right lane, duking out for a small period of time. You have the support and the mid laner over here in the center. And then accompanied by that, you just have the ADCs playing by themselves. Now, what's the problem with this? Well, as of right now, I can't really tell you a problem outside of ADCs maybe getting too fed too early, but I really do like seeing supports here, as of supports can add more CC to invades. It adds idea to counter initiates when the game starts, as well as easier invades, depending on how team comps are played. And I think it helps us to look at how we pick our early game compositions better than before, seeing as this area was a very safe area to be played in, and that's no longer the case. While this area is still safe, that's not the area that's important anymore. Your mid laner getting that red buff and the duo XP going here isn't really what's happening anymore. Instead, we're starting to see a big focus on this side of the map. While there was a focus on it before, I feel like now we've almost intensely looked at this, because you have so much writing on this area. You have the jungler, you have the solo laner, and the support. The support getting ahead can mean he can make rotations faster. The solo getting ahead means he can make rotations, period. And while the jungler getting ahead can sometimes just spell doom for all lanes because of his freedom to rotate. Now, a common occurrence here that you're hearing about is rotations. Now, why am I focusing so much on rotations? Well, if the jungler and the support go here, well, they can rotate faster, and the jungler and the support go here, well, rotations. And the reason for that is because as of right now in the current meta, we're looking at a very burst centralized game. Now, while the game's always kind of laid that way, I believe towards the later half of Season 3, we've started to see an expansion and such, with gods such as Thoth and even Raijin in earlier Season 3 being released, who focus on starting that game and at their level 5s and their level 8s, bringing a big power spike into the match to hopefully bring out first bloods or possibly even third bloods if you're playing another team who might not be as suited for the early game as you are, or maybe has just put themselves in a bad position, very similar to what Sword did in the first SWC game. Now, rotations. Where does that fit into this burst meta? Well, if you have a Hoonbots who has gotten himself, let's say, 2 kills. I know that's a bad 2, but just stick with me. If this Hoonbots has gotten himself 2 kills by 4 minutes, and he's in this area, let's say, this Hoonbots might not be threatening to this solo. And the reason why is because the solo is probably going to be up here in their tower. The solo's going to be playing a very safe game because they're aware, oh, well, this Hoonbots is fed. Well, what about the ADC over here? What if this Hoonbots instead, comes back to spawn? He's going to have 2,000 gold at this point, and this Hoonbots makes a little travel and puts himself right there. How's the ADC going to know anything? At this point, the ADC probably hasn't backed because this is just a farm match happening. And more importantly, the ADC probably doesn't have wards up here, so I'd like to see how this sort of thing is going to be held from happening. I find it interesting that we're starting to see a lot of focus on the duo lane, even though it's now 1v1. I think this is going to be where we're going to find out where the game really twists tides. But that all does start on this right side. So what do you have to know going into Conquest at a low level? Well, you might not necessarily have to know this, 1-2-2 strat. What I would more so suggest is that as the support, you should be playing up here with your solo and your jungler. So the 3 you should be together, and the mid and the ADs you should be going this way. Now, if your team doesn't understand this 2-3 split and instead want to do, the basic 3-2 split, do it because this is more of an SPL and, as I said, newer strategy from everything that I'm seeing. But if it's possible, this strat played for an invade could be completely devastating, especially to a team that doesn't understand what's going on. You'll have a 3v2 here, added with a god like Ares or Ymir or even Athena. For the amount of CC they can carry at level 1, you can see potentially devastating results to what you can do to an enemy team. So to wrap up this Smite Basics, this Conquest as of right now, SWC 2017, the date is January 5th. There hasn't been much change to the meta if you understand what the base meta is. You go, you collect your buffs, and you go to lane. Outside of that, we see the support playing a lot more in this area, whereas I feel before that was more of the jungler's job, and we see the support playing here. So the support role is the only role that's really been affected by this new meta change, as well as the solo having to be more careful in this lane. And the ADC getting fed a little bit faster, which I think is scarier for everybody on the team. Anyway, guys, this has been Smite Basics. This is our very first video talking about the current Conquest updates to meta.